I'm pretty sure it's still annual. Yeah, there's still 10 dots in there. Yeah. I think it's just an optical illusion. So, okay, so that's the infant mortality rate. Second one I look at is the general fertility rate. The general fertility rate is the number of live births divided by women aged 15 to 44. So that's considered childbearing age. 15 to 44 is the standard demographer's childbearing age definition. Here's a picture. So this is the general fertility rate for the white population. These data are 1800 to 1998. Let me get my little red dot out of the way there. So we get this decline. The annual data, there's a gap in the data. I don't know why. There was a gap in the data right there. The annual data started around 1908 or so. There was a gap in the data, so let's just pretend it goes right like this. The period that we're looking at is here. So they're really focusing on the effect of relief, so they're looking at the 1930s, so that's the period they're looking at. So it's when the fertility rate is coming down, it hits a bottom in the trough, and then it goes back up. What's this period here called? Baby boom. So the baby boom is considered to be 1946 to 1964, and it reflects the fact that there is this boom, yeah, the large animal going through the snake effect. So this boom here in births, the baby boom. Suicide rate. They look at a whole lot of other things, but I thought the suicide rate was one of the more interesting pieces they look at. And here's the suicide rate. This is per 100,000. So 10 per 100,000. It's a relatively small percentage. But what's interesting, so they're looking at there's 1932. So they're looking at this period here, the 1933 to 1940 period, when the suicide rate generally is coming down. And the question is whether or not the provision of relief lowers suicides more than they would have fallen anyway. I thought it was really interesting to look at the. Oops, erase all ink on slide. There we go. I just thought that was an interesting. I don't know. Yeah, there's something interesting there. Take a public health class. It must be a history of public health class. Should be. There's got to be. There have to be historians who study this, just because there's something here to explain that's not over here to explain. So, okay. All right. What do we get? They have city by city data on these demographic measures. They have city by city data on the amount of relief that's provided. They combine all the relief in one pot. They don't look at each of these separate programs separately. The sample that they're going to use is 97 cities. So the 97 cities are pretty much scattered around the country, and they're going to look at these 97 cities and see whether or not there are statistically significant relationships between each of those three demographic variables and the dollar amount of relief controlling for all of these other things. So they're going to control for the amount of economic activity that takes place in that county. They measure that with retail sales because they don't have any sort of direct measure of economic activity, so they use retail sales. They're going to control for socioeconomic factors. So that's a lot of that is what's the demographic makeup of the population. So they're percent black, percent Asian, immigrant. I forget what else they had in there. Female. And then city-specific effects. Maybe there's some differences that you can't actually directly capture that are differences between one city and another, and so they use an econometric method that's called fixed effects. And fixed effects is exactly the same thing as putting in a whole bunch of dummy or indicator variables for 96 out of the 97 cities. So when somebody says I'm doing fixed effects by city, it's the same exact thing as having dummy 1 for city number 1, dummy 2 for city number 2, on through dummy 96 for the 96th city, and then comparing everything to the 97th city. So it's just a way of allowing, again, for a shift in the, allowing for a shift. I want to undo that sentence. It's allowing for city-by-city differences that aren't otherwise captured. There. Okay. The way they reported their results was they reported what they called one standard deviation effects. So the idea here is they wanted some standardization so that there could be a comparison of the results from demographic measure to demographic measure. And so they're going to see how much. Oh, I want to say this. Wait. If there's a one standard deviation change in the amount of relief, how many standard deviation changes does that create in changes, there we go, in the demographic variable? That's the question. So one standard deviation effect is we're going to say, okay, there's a one standard deviation increase in relief. So figure out what the mean is, figure out the standard deviation, and then take a one standard deviation jump. If there's a one standard deviation jump in the amount of relief, how many standard deviations effect does that have on suicide rate, on fertility, on whatever? And so we're not looking at what's the size of the effect, because these numbers, the suicide rate is 10 out of 100,000. Those are really small numbers. And so instead of having coefficients that are 0.03, it's going to be how many standard deviations difference is there in the demographic variable as a result of a one standard deviation jump in the relief variable. None of the other coefficients are reported because they don't matter. The only thing that matters is what's the effective relief. So all of that other stuff, all the role for the socioeconomic factors for the economic activity, all that other stuff suppressed, don't have to report it, nobody really cares. Okay, infant mortality rate. For the infant mortality rate, they got a one standard deviation effect, that's supposed to be approximately. One standard deviation effect of a 0.2 to 0.3 standard deviation reduction in infant mortality rate. So one standard deviation increase in relief leads to a 0.2 to 0.3 standard deviation decrease in infant mortality rate. That is to say, more relief makes babies live. Babies die less when their mothers receive relief. I mean, let's take it away from infant mortality and talk about little babies dying. Yeah. The T-stat is the T-stat on that estimate of 0.2 to 0.3. Well, that's two different results. So there was one column was 0.2 and another column was 0.3, and so I just said, let's call it 0.2 to 0.3, and the T's were both around 2. So the table, I don't know if you read it yet, the table has lots and lots of data, so I was just trying to pull out for you the key variable, key number. Okay, next, fertility rates. One standard deviation effect for fertility was an increase of 0.9 of a standard deviation with a T of about 2.8, statistically significant. So what does that mean? More relief, more babies. So fewer babies die, more babies are born. Probably the fertility, they figured that the increase in fertility was actually through marriage. That what was happening was not that people are having more babies, but that people are getting married sooner and therefore having more babies. Suicide rate. Statistically significant effect on the suicide rate. The decrease of 0.9 of a standard deviation in the suicide rate. That more relief lowered suicide rates. People were less likely to take their own life if they lived in cities that received more relief than was the case in cities that received less relief. Interesting result. Seems to say that while the New Deal relief didn't have a huge effect in terms of overall expansion, so the chart from the beginning that Romer showed us, it did have effects in terms of variables that we might care about. That it did matter, even though it was a small dollar amount that didn't contribute to a huge increase in GDP, it was enough of a dollar amount that babies lived instead of dying, that people didn't kill themselves, and that people got married. That it changed demographic behavior in ways that we care about. All right, where am I? Oh, goody, goody, goody. Last topic, World War II. Any questions on the fishback? Sam? They think it's about marriage from other data that had increases in marriage rates. I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think it's. I don't recall that they tested it in the article, so I don't think they looked at neutrality. But I think it was anecdotal stuff. And what they were in particular talking about was that it wasn't like an increase in births to single women. That this was within the context of marriage. So, all right, World War II. When do we finally get some expansionary fiscal policy? World War II. Bombing of Pearl Harbor leads to a huge increase in the defense budget and enormous mobilization for war. And that enormous mobilization for war was the biggest expansionary fiscal policy plan that you can imagine. Table 2 in the handout for today. Yeah. Shows you. Oh, I fixed the headings. I thought I changed the headings. Where's the handout? I did. I changed the headings there. I didn't change the headings here. That was silly. Okay, anyway. The first column is the tax revenues, TA for tax revenues. The second column is the outlays, G plus TR. Take the tax revenues, subtract the outlays, you get the budget balance. So column 1 minus column 2 equals column 3. Negative number means that we've got a deficit. Positive number means we've got a surplus. Take the budget surplus or budget deficit, divide it by GNP, and you get the final column. So these in the last column are percentages. So that's what share of GNP or GDP is the deficit. So there you go. So we go from a deficit that's around 3% of GDP in 39 and 40 to 13% in 42, 31% in 43, 23% in 44. That's expansionary fiscal policy. That's expansionary fiscal policy. When you go from a 3% to a 30%, a 10-fold increase in the deficit as a share of GDP over a 3-year period, that's expansionary fiscal policy. And that expansionary fiscal policy brought an end to the Great Depression. Because then we get back to 2%, 2, 2.5, 3, 1.9, very low levels of unemployment. We get actually beyond trend, so we're producing above trend. If you remember the picture that we go from producing below trend to producing above trend in terms of real GDP. This is a period where there's rationing, so in order to buy sugar, you needed not just a little bit of money, but you needed a coupon. In order to buy a 5-pound bag of sugar, you had to have a coupon that went with it. If you wanted to buy flour, you needed a coupon. If you wanted to buy gas, you needed a coupon. There was consumer rationing because the resources needed to be redirected to the war effort. As a result, not surprisingly, consumer spending as a share of the total economy goes down. Government spending as a share of the total economy surges here during the war. Investment goes down as well. The factories, the Crane Way Pavilion in Richmond was the Ford factory, and that was converted from assembling Fords to assembling Jeeps and other military vehicles during the war. So a lot of factories are converted into military production. So there's still work going on in those factories, but instead of making, there are no private automobiles produced during the war. All the car places are not producing private automobiles, they're producing military vehicles. So all of that conversion happens during the war. So you get a big increase in government spending, and you finally get the end of the Depression. How was it paid for? Let's say about half. I think that's fine. About half with taxes, about half with borrowing. It's a little bit less than half with taxes, a little bit more with borrowing. 46 and 54 is close enough to 50-50 for my business. So about half with taxes, about half with borrowing. Who was the borrowing coming from? About a fourth of the borrowing. There we go. About a fourth of the borrowing was from households. About 40% from banks, and about 40% from non-bank institutions. You've seen the pictures that you printed out, those slides. So we had another advertising campaign. So I showed you the pictures from World War I. Now we've got another one. This is actually from Canada, but I just love it so much I had to show you. Dominion of Canada. You've got a date with a bond. Buy victory bonds. Yeah.
So does non-bank institutions like other countries?
Non-bank institution is going to be largely life insurance companies. Is there foreign lending? Probably some, but this is such a worldwide event that I would imagine, that not as much as now because it was such a global thing. So there's one picture. I love that one. The pictures during this war really dark. I find them very dark. Yeah. So there they are with their gas masks. I love it with the apple in the school books. But buy war bonds and stamps to keep them safe. So there was a very different fear during World War II than there was during World War I, right? The fear of gas and other sort of weapons. Buy war bonds. I don't know. I find it very dark. It's very scary. This one's not scary. That's not scary. Well, it's scary in a different way, but not scary in the way that this one's scary. Buy war bonds. And then I think I got one more, don't I? Oh, yes. And then labor force changes. The interest rates. Oh, I got more stuff. I forgot. I have a few. Oh, good. Okay. Interest rates. So how did they do all this? How did the government pay for all this borrowing? Well, one thing was that the interest rates were kept very low. There was an agreement made between the Fed and the Treasury, and the Fed promised to keep interest rates low in order to keep the financing of the war low. So it was relatively cheap for the government to borrow. That promise continues until 1951. So in 1951, the Fed says, we're done. We kept interest rates low for a decade. You're on your own. We're going to let interest rates go up now. So the period here from, let me find 1942. Here's 1942. Here's 1951. So despite this huge amount of borrowing here associated with World War II, interest rates do not rise because the Fed is conducting expansionary monetary policy. They are fully accommodating the increased government borrowing by increasing the money supply, which keeps the interest rates low. So standard open market operations to accommodate the expansionary fiscal policy and keep interest rates low. Labor force. 1940, the labor force was 32 million. In 1943, the labor force was 42 million, and the military was 9 million. So that means I got to find basically about 20 million people in that 3-year period, right? Because the labor force increases by 10 million people, and the military increases essentially by almost 9 million people. So where do those 19 million people come from? A lot of them were women. Yeah. We did have a military, but it wasn't. But the number of people in the military was much smaller. So I should look it up. I think it's probably going to be about 1 million in 1940 or less. I mean, it was a huge. This campus was like Mills College. So this was like a women's campus, 1940, 1943. There were almost no men on campus. It was almost entirely women in all the classes during the war years because almost all of the men were in war. No. When you go down to Moffett, to the right of Moffett as you're walking down the hill is that little circle. That little circle is a memorial to the war classes. So to all of the classes that were affected by the war. Okay, so where do all those people come from? Rosie the Riveter. Now, Rosie, there's a new, by the way, new museum, more tourism here. Go on a bike ride. I know, you don't have time. After you're done with your finals, get your bike out and ride along the Bay Trail, which starts, you can go from campus, go down Addison, take the bike bridge over, pick up the Bay Trail there, follow the Bay Trail along. The downside is you have to go up and over behind Golden Gate Field. It's okay, it's not that big of a hill. Follow the Bay Trail all the way along through Richmond, and at the end of the Bay Trail, where the Crane Wave Pavilion, where they have concerts sometimes. Bjork is coming there. I found this out from my son yesterday. Thank God for supplying to me. He said the tickets are $100. He doesn't think that he's going to get $100 worth of satisfaction out of going to New York. It's like marginal utility analysis rocks. Anyway, ride along, and the Rosie the Riveter Museum is at the end of the Bay Trail. So you ride your bike there, and it's right where the Crane Wave Pavilion is at the end of the Bay Trail. It's a fabulous bike ride. Rosie the Riveter, the myth has always been that Rosie was a housewife who was drawn into the labor force by patriotic appeal. The myth is not true. Most of the Rosies, that is the women who were working in the munitions factory, making the planes and the jeeps and the other military vehicles, most of those were women who had previous workforce experience. A lot of them had manufacturing experience. There were a lot of housewives who entered the labor force. But the good jobs went to the women who had workforce experience. So the good jobs, the well-paying jobs, the Rosie the Riveter jobs, those were women who had been in the workforce, who when the war was over and the men came back and took those jobs over, those women stayed in the workforce and didn't go back into the home. There was another whole set of women who did enter the workforce as part of the patriotic appeal, who did then leave the workforce and go back home and gave us the baby boom after the war was over. Other pictures, women aiding the war effort, so sewing machines, can all you can, lots of emphasis on growing as much as you could in your own yard to save the farmers' productions for the soldiers. I will see you all on Thursday. Go Bears!